Welcome to United Kingdom, a giant royal financial machine. On paper, this is an economic titan. Even if London, the capital of the UK, was separated into an independent nation, its economic scale would be larger than Sweden, Argentina, and even the UAE. This is the center of global finance, insurance, legal services, and international capital flows. In many ways, England remains the crown jewel that the world admires. But that's the dream that Britain sells to the world. And for those who actually live here, what they get isn't a dream, it's a harsh reality. If you don't get rich quickly, you'll fall behind the pace of a stable life. Rent is skyrocketing, energy bills are ballooning, traffic is too congested, public health is overwhelmed, real income is increasingly shrinking. And for the first time, even those with full-time jobs, decent incomes, and stable work histories are starting to feel life becoming absurd, not because of any luxury, but from the most basic needs themselves. From the outside, everything still looks fine. GDP is still large. The financial market remains vibrant. London continues to attract people. But beneath that veneer, a slow decay is taking place. Of course, every crisis needs a starting point. The absurdity of modern-day Britain isn't found in the financial markets, it's right in the lease you just signed. To understand how absurd life in the UK has become, let's start with the most basic human right, housing. A 1 to 2 bedroom apartment, approximately 50 to 61 square meters. It doesn't need to be too fancy. You don't need an open plan to look trendy. Just enough for 2 adults, a small dining table, and most importantly, the feeling that there is still a stable support behind you. But in recent years, that normalcy has slipped away. Starting with contract renewals, with slight increases. By the time you check your account after paying rent and realize your buffer is as thin as paper. The ONS recorded the average private rent across the UK as approximately £1,366 per month, an increase of 4.4% compared to the same period last year. It sounds like a statistical line, but for working people, it has a very specific meaning. Every month you have to do more, and you also have to put in an extra safety margin just to keep your position. It's like you're trying to run really fast, but you find yourself standing still, even step back. And this is where life begins to become absurd in a very predictable way. Wages in the UK have stagnated for too long after the 2008 shock. An academic review in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy describes that food wage growth in the UK stagnated for over 15 years after the crisis, coinciding with a period of weak productivity. Meanwhile, the ONS recorded that the stock measure of rental prices reached record high year-on-year increases in 2022 to 2023, just as many households were emerging from the pandemic. Private renters with median household incomes may have to spend 36.3% of their income on an average-priced rental unit, surpassing the 30% mark, which many consider the beginning of tension. And when it's stretched, everything else contracts on its own. Vacations are becoming less frequent. The house renovation plan has been postponed. The intention to have children is on hold. Even a small savings for old age becomes difficult to talk about. Accumulation. Once the cornerstone of a stable life suddenly became a luxury item. Even a small event, a broken car, a rising bill, a few weeks of illness is now enough to cause the budget to start running dry. The first trap is the rent trap. The longer you rent, the harder it is to accumulate wealth. The harder it is to accumulate, the more you are locked into renting. And every time you enter a new market, the rules of the game are rewritten without your input. The second trap is the buying trap. The UK House Price Index shows that the average UK house price is around £270,000. That number turns deposit into a gatekeeper, not just financially. But it's about culture. Whoever can overcome it stays in the game, whoever can't stands outside and looks in. And when housing becomes a trap, it's not just a personal story, it shifts the cost burden onto society. Homelessness statistics show that the termination of assured short-hold tenancies is a very common reason why many households are at risk of homelessness in 2024 to 25. Shelter, based on statutory figures, states that 169,050 children in England are living in temporary accommodation. A generation growing up in a state of temporary residence not only lacks space but also feels like they are a discordant note in the symphony of a growing economic powerhouse. You might ask, so why don't they build more? The government estimates net additional dwellings in England for 2024 to 25 at 208,600, while the Commons Library cites an estimated demand of around 340,000 homes per year. That distance explains why the market is always short and why old contracts have become a privilege. We are clearly working in an economy that was once confident in its Western European position, then realized it was falling behind while still having to pay housing prices as if it were on the rise. And as the gap between effort and reward widens, one doesn't need a major tragedy to despair, just one lease extension. What percentage of your income are you paying for rent? And from what year did you start to see normal become fragile? If you've ever had a moment where you woke up and thought about leaving, what was the final straw, a new rent level? Or the feeling that there was no future to count on? Because when the roof becomes a burden, the next sentence almost appears on its own. Not only is money being sucked away, time is also starting to be taxed. If rent is the biggest deduction on a paycheck, then time tax is the quietest deduction in life. No invoice, no announcement, only minutes are broken down each day. And by the time you manage to pause for a few seconds to reflect on everything, the whole year has flown by. The absurdity in Britain doesn't lie in the fact that people have to work a lot, it lies in the fact that people have to spend too many hours completing things that should be smooth. Go to work, change route, waiting for the train, wait for the call, waiting for an appointment, waiting for a response, waiting for something that shouldn't need to be waited for. Public transportation is where the time tax is most clearly manifested. The ORR stated that the cancellation measure for the 12 months leading up to December 2024 is 4.0%. On paper, 4% looks quite small, but in real life, it's enough to turn a life schedule into a constant backup plan. You're not working by the hour anymore. You follow the everything is always in need of repair mentality. Also during that period, the ORR recorded 67.0% of station stops as being on time by definition, arriving within 59 seconds. In other words, on time according to strict standards is no longer the default. It became a lucky version of the morning. And time tax isn't just on the tracks. It's all over the road. RAC estimates there are about 6 potholes per mile on council-managed roads in England and Wales, and the average damage cost for a car is about £590. You lost money, you're wasting your time. You've lost all confidence that the familiar path tomorrow will still be normal. A civilized society where people have to learn the skill of reading the road surface like a risk map sounds a bit ironic, but perhaps it's also an experience upgrade in a very strange sense. Then it's the queue, not just at the station. And everywhere needs a confirmation mark, a call, a procedure, the points of intersection between the people and the system. The problem isn't that the system is bad. The problem is that the system creates friction as a natural state. And when friction becomes the norm, you're forced to live on buffer, time buffer, bridge the gap, health mattress. Where do you cut the cushions? Usually during sleep, at dinner, at family gatherings, in the very part of life that is worth living. Time tax also creeps into places few people name. Supply chains and standards. When border procedures increase, the seller bears the initial burden. The buyer bears the burden later, and the government sometimes admits that friction has a real cost. In 2025, the UK announced a temporary suspension of some additional border checks on live animal imports from the EU and certain goods/plants from Ireland, stating frankly that this was to reduce red tape and save time and money. Even going to the supermarket takes extra time, because shrinkflation/skimpflation forces you to compare unit prices more carefully, read labels more, and weigh things more. Which one? They are monitoring this phenomenon as a way to quietly increase bills. When time is fragmented like this, people don't just get tired, people age psychologically, always on guard, always waiting, always change the plan. And then you wake up in the morning and don't hate England. You just feel like you're living in a system that makes you pay by the minute. How many hours a week do you spend just keeping life running? What takes the most time? Traveling, procedures, or waiting? And do you remember the last time you left the house without a buffer? Because when time is taxed, the instinctive reaction is to work harder to compensate. But this is when the story turns to the next unpleasant thing. Work is no longer profitable. There was a formula that was once quite clear in England. Finished studying, go to work. Do better gradually. Life is getting better. There is accumulation. There are options. Not everyone is rich. But going up is a real feeling. Now that formula is still being repeated. The only thing is, the results are becoming increasingly inconsistent. You're still getting up early, still going to work, still trying not to be late. I still work extra when needed. But by the end of the month, the reward no longer felt like a reward. It's like a certificate confirming that you've survived another 30 days. A review article in the Oxford Review of Economic Policy describes a difficult reality. Food prices in the UK have been persistently stagnant for 15 years after the crisis, coinciding with a period of weak productivity. In other words, this isn't just a bad year, it's a long-standing economic habit. And when food is slow to arrive, every essential price increase becomes a direct hit. IGD notes that food inflation based on CPI may have peaked at around 19.1% in March 2023. You don't need to read financial newspapers to understand that number. You just need to go to the supermarket. You bought the right old things. But the bag is lighter, or it's still heavy, and it's heavy on the bill. Perhaps the most noteworthy thing is the effort that was devalued. You speed up, but the conveyor belt also sped up. And then the system tells you to try a little harder. That sounds very encouraging. It's like telling someone swimming upstream that if they just swim more enthusiastically, the current will stop. In an international comparison, the feeling of falling behind is even more pronounced. The Resolution Foundation's Stagnation Nation report states quite bluntly, by 2018 the income of a typical UK household was 16% lower than in Germany and 9% lower than in France, while in 2007 the UK had been higher than both. This is a psychological slip. You're not just worried about the bills, you worry you're standing in an economy that was once confident, but now tells you to be satisfied with not worse. And no words isn't just about salary. It lies in a new cost equation. Housing consumes most of income. Time is taxed by friction, essentials have risen sharply, and certainty has decreased. A little bit of everything. But overall, labor loses its meaning of stability in exchange. Fiat, some people will say, there are still industries with salary increases, and there are still people living well. Right. But if okay is only true for part of it, and the rest requires constant effort, the question is no longer about who works harder. The question is, what is the game rewarding? There's a subtle difference between poor public service and public service becoming a livelihood risk. The spy is angry. Risk is more frightening because you can't predict the outcome. You don't know when it's your turn. You don't know if you'll be able to handle it in time. And, the worst part, you don't know how many backup plans you need to prepare to live peacefully. The NHS is a symbol because it is associated with national dignity, but a symbol is only valuable when it functions at the right time. The House of Commons Library shows that the hospital treatment waiting list reached 7.7 million and remains around 7.4 million. This number is not a bad winter. It's a long-term condition. And as it stretches out, the waiting time begins to resemble a form of stratification. Whoever can wait, can wait. If you can't wait, you'll have to find another way. The press in late 2025 also frequently mentioned 12-hour waits in A&E as a grim milestone. You don't need to believe every headline. Just look at the overall feeling. A system that was born to reduce risk, yet makes people calculate the risk before they even step into it. It sounds strange, but life sometimes works that way. Deeper than the surface. The story isn't just about the doctor or the appointment, it's located on the foundation. The Public Accounts Committee stated that the maintenance backlog for the NHS estate is approximately £10.2 billion, up from £4.7 billion. Simply put, the things that needed fixing were left unattended for too long. And when the foundation cracks, you often don't hear the cracking sound. People only hear the sound of procrastination. At the national money level, the OBR recorded debt interest at £111.6 billion. That's real money, leaving the table before it can turn into a new clinic or new machinery. As a result, sometimes you get the feeling that Britain is paying interest like a credit card debtor, regularly, very seriously, and still not without worry. Then comes the thing that makes people lose faith the most deeply, when the system is wrong, and correcting it takes a long time. The government has published its final response to the infected blood inquiry, stating that it has spent over £1.2 billion in compensation advance payments and implemented recommendations. This isn't just about healthcare. This is a lesson about responsibility. And it makes many people wonder, if a tragedy can take decades to be properly named, are smaller events being swept under the rug in silence? When public services become risky, society automatically creates a buy safety market. Whoever has money can buy time. Those who don't have money can pay with waiting time. That's when equality doesn't disappear on paper. It disappeared from the appointment schedule. Here, you won't need another difficult list. You just need to see the mechanism. Each self-created burden leads to the next. And at some point, there's no more room for adjustment. Rent is high, you move away, travel time is longer, and more easily damaged. ORR recorded a cancellation rate of 4.0% by their measure for the 12 months ending December 2024. Listen quietly. But in life, 4% is enough to turn a work schedule into a guessing game. You no longer live by the clock, you live according to a backup plan. Further away means you'll be home later. Less cooking time, less break time. Health is gradually deteriorating. As it wears down, you rely more on public services, and when public services are overloaded, you have to wait again. Waiting longer will just waste more time. Then work was affected, income is being pulled down, and the harder it is for you to escape the rental trap. This is a loop, not noisy, but it's very durable, like a string being pulled out slowly. It won't make you fall right away, it just makes you unable to stand straight. The impossible doesn't lie in a number, it lies in the feeling. Life is forced to operate as a risk management project. Every day must be optimized. It needs to be recalculated every week, every month. I have to pray that nothing happens. And when a society operates like that for too long, you start looking up to the larger system. And I saw something else happening too. Execution capabilities were becoming expensive and slow in a very strange way. HS2 is an easily misunderstood symbol. The issue isn't that protecting nature is absurd. The problem is that the decision-making process and getting permission sometimes turn into a cost grinder. The Public Accounts Committee once cited the example of a 1 kilometer-long bat protection tunnel costing approximately £100 million. The Financial Times later reported that, adjusted for inflation and delays, the expected cost was around £119 million, and a significant portion had been spent by early 2025. At the same time, the economy also bears standard friction at the national level. The OBR stated directly, the evidence to date remains consistent with the assumption that Brexit reduces both import and export intensity and, in the long run, Imports and exports will be about 15% lower than in the scenario of remaining in the EU. The government is once again having to find ways to reduce red tape in a few areas to save time and money, such as temporarily suspending some border checks on live animal imports from the EU and certain plants/products from Ireland. In short, you have a personal life that is squeezed for every minute, and a macro system is also burning minutes through process. In the middle are the people pay both bills. Perhaps Britain won't collapse in the sense that you wake up one morning and everything is gone. It's sliding slowly, and it's that slowness that's concerning, because it makes us get used to having to shrink. Co is hoping again. Let's reschedule. And then they lower the standard of living and call it adaptation. The absurdity doesn't lie in a number, it's about the feeling. You do everything right, but you still have to live as if you're avoiding an invisible trap. The roof became a test. Time becomes tax. Work becomes an assembly line. Public services have become a daily small gamble, and when even the most basic things are no longer certain. Wanting to leave every morning is sometimes a survival instinct. And you? What was the moment that made you realize life in the UK had become absurd, a bill, a weight, or an experience that made you lose faith? If you had to choose one thing to restore, first housing, time, real income, or the reliability of public services, what would you choose? And why? How do you think retreating is happening around you? Leaving, changing your lifestyle, or simply silently lowering your expectations? If you find this video partially reflects your own experiences, you can click, like, share, and subscribe to follow future exploration journeys. Please note, the content in this video is analytical and commentary based on publicly available data, official reports, and widely documented social experiences at the time of production. Some figures may change with updates, and experiences may vary depending on region, industry, and individual circumstances. The video is not intended to attack specific individuals or groups, and does not offer financial, medical, or legal advice. The goal is to ask questions, open up discussion, and encourage viewers to verify information themselves.